everyone, my name is Rachel Wells and today is my first day of my Bible training school, and I've just completed my study of Revelation 13 and I really enjoy studying Revelation for myself and researching in the concordance and everything. And the purpose of sharing this video of the main points of my study from Revelation 13 is to inspire you to study the Bible as well, especially studying prophecy, since we're near the end of time and it's so important that we study these prophecies. And I just want to share just one or two main points with you that stick out in my mind from what I've studied from Revelation 13. The first point is from Revelation 13 verse 5, and it says, "And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months." Now it says that there was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. So the first thing that we really need to determine is what is blasphemy? What does it represent in the Bible? And for that, there's two definitions. The first one is taken from Luke 5:21. And in Luke 5:21, the scribes and Pharisees were accusing Jesus of blasphemy, and they were attacking him, and they said to him, "Who is this which speaketh blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" So in other words, their definition of blasphemy was to have the prerogative of God, to assume the power and the rights of God, and the right which they were talking about here was to forgive sins. And in this case, Jesus wasn't committing blasphemy, of course. We know that he actually was God, and he did have the power to forgive sins. But for anyone else besides Jesus to claim to have the right, to have the prerogative of God to forgive sins, that is blasphemy. And another text that tells us what blasphemy is from John 10:33. And it says, again, they were attacking him and they were stoning him, and they were about to stone him, and they said, "For a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, because that thou being a man makest thyself God." Now he was God, but they were saying that according to them, he made himself God. He assumed the title of God by calling himself the Son of God and other godly titles by saying, "I am." And in their minds, he was saying that he was God. And he was, but they didn't believe that. So what are the two definitions of blasphemy? Well, the first one is to assume the prerogative of God, to assume his authority and rights, and one of them is to forgive sins. And the other definition is to assume the name and title of God. And we realize in Revelation 13 that this power, which so far, as I've studied so far, I understand that this power is the papacy. And it's so true that even if you didn't really know for sure if this power was the papacy, just by looking at this verse, you could kind of get an idea, a clue of what this power is, because we realize this Revelation 13 is covering the time period from before the beginning of the 1260 up until the time of the Sunday law, when no man can buy or sell during that time. And during the 1260, when the Roman Catholic Church was in full power, and even now it still happens, but then especially, they claimed two things: the power to forgive sins and also the title of God. And even today, it's still happening today that the Pope claims that. And in the end of time, during the Sunday law, when the Roman Catholic Church tries to get back into power, we're in that time period right now, she will try to exalt herself more and more. And during that time, the Pope will try to be acknowledged by everyone as supreme, the supreme lawmaker of the whole earth. And he will try to be in the place of God. And remember, the first definition which I gave you was the power to forgive sins. And it's so true that the priests in the Catholic Church, they claim the very power to forgive sins. And also the titles of God, Vicarius Filii Dei, which the Pope claims is Vicar of the Son of God. And so he's supposed to be the Son of God's representative. And he even says that he is God himself. And in a lot of the writings, the official writings of the Roman Catholic Church, they say that he is God himself. And also what's very interesting is Speaking of the same power, in 2 Thessalonians, it talks about the very same power, the papacy. And it says here, hold on a minute. It says in chapter 2 and verse 4, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, it's good enough to know that, okay, the papacy claims to have the rights and the authority of God and even the very title of God. But what about, how does this apply to us in our lives? Well, we may think, well, I don't worship, I don't bow down to the papacy like that. I don't bow down to the Pope and see him as God. I know that there is only one God, and that's true, we may know that. But in our lives, who do we allow supreme in our lives? Do we allow God to be supreme and the only God? Or do we allow the devil and his agents to be supreme? Do we put God first in everything? You know, the commandment, it says it's that we should put God first. It says that thou shalt have no other gods before me. And we may say, well, we don't bow down to any man-made idols or worship any gods like that. But we may not physically do it, but in our lives, do we bow down to, or do we put anything first before God? Anything that we allow to come before God, even when it comes to breakfast. In our home, we have breakfast after worship, because we want to make sure that in the morning we put God first. And in everything, not just when it comes to worship, but in everything in our lives, we should always put God first. Otherwise, we're like, you know, so many other people who don't profess to know God, who actually worship man-made idols, or who worship the Pope. So that's the first point. Second point, which I got from, which I want to share with you from Revelation 13, is it's a very encouraging one actually. In verse 10 of Revelation 13, it says, well, verse 9, I'll start from there. If any man have an ear, let him hear. It says this a few times in Revelation, not just chapter 13. And I find it interesting that it tells us, the Bible really instructs us to hear, to listen to what it's saying. So it really tells us that we should pay close attention to the following verses. And God really wants us to have an ear to hear, not just to read, but he wants us to understand and literally hear what he's trying to tell us. And it says, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So let's look at the first one. It says, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. Why did it mention that in Revelation 13? Well, because the papacy, the Pope in particular, at the end of its zenith of power, the 1260 years of papal rule, beginning from 538 to 1798. In 1798, and in February, the Pope was literally taken captive by Berthier, who was Napoleon's French general, and he died. The Pope died in exile in France a couple months later. So literally, it was surely fulfilled that he that leadeth into captivity, you know, the Pope was throughout the whole, not him himself, but, you know, the papacy power was throughout the whole 1260 years, persecuting God's people and oppressing them and taking them into captivity and doing so many bad and cruel things to them. Now, the papacy gets repaid, so to speak. So it says, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. And it says, he that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Now, the Pope, in 1798, when he was taken captive, he wasn't necessarily killed with a sword. But this is also referring to Revelation 11. And Revelation 11 is talking about the end of the 1260 primarily. It's talking about the French Revolution. And during the French Revolution, the people turned against their leaders and turned against the Roman Catholic Church. And the Great Controversy is a very enlightening book about this. And I just want to read to you what Sister White has to say about when they turned against them. He says, all too well, the people, this is in page 283 of Great Controversy, And she says that all too well the people had learned the lessons of cruelty and torture which Rome had so diligently taught. A day of retribution had at last come. It was not now the disciples of Jesus that were thrust into dungeons and dragged to the stake. Long ago these had perished or had been driven into exile. So here we see captivity or exile again, just like the Pope was driven to exile in France. Unsparing Rome now felt the deadly power of those whom she had trained to delight in deeds of blood. The example of persecution which the clergy of France had exhibited for so many ages was now retorted upon them with signal vigor. The scaffolds ran red with the blood of the priests. The galleys and the prisons, once crowded with Huguenots, were now filled with their persecutors. Chained to the bench and toiling at the oar, the Roman Catholic clergy experienced all those woes which their church had so freely inflicted on the gentle heretics. So here we find that these people, the Roman Catholic Church, they finally get repaid during the French Revolution. The people turn against them, and instead of the reformers being killed, now it's the clergy, the very priests themselves, and the nobles and the nobility who are getting killed and thrown to prison. And this is what got reaped when the Roman Catholic Church decided to, first of all, be in the place of God and set aside God's law and substitute it for Sunday keeping and even image worship and taking out commandment number 2, and also even more so for persecuting God's people. And God says that we are the apple of his eye, and anyone who touches us touches him. And he says that if you do this to the least of these my brethren, you do this also to me. So whatever people may try to inflict on us, they're doing it not just to us, they're really doing it to God. And imagine if you threw Jesus, if you could throw Jesus into prison, if you could beat him, if you could kill him just in the same manner as the Roman Catholic Church kills the reformers and God's people. God would not spare the retribution in that case. He would definitely punish you for doing that. That's God. How much, in the same degree, when we are his children and we are the apple of his eye, and whoever touches us, it's like they're touching God. Not that we are God, but that's how close we are to Jesus' heart. So just as God wouldn't spare you if you tried to attack Jesus personally, if you could, therefore God would not spare anyone who tries to attack us as his people as we're walking uprightly and trying to obey God's law. He will definitely visit retribution, and that's what we see happening here. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. And it says, here is the patience and the faith of the saints. This is what the saints have been waiting for, and they've been crying out to God for mercy. The blood of the martyrs was crying out, Revelation says. Not literally, but that's a metaphor or a personification, showing how God's people were just weeping and crying out to God for mercy when they were being persecuted, saying, God, please fight for us. And these people were being slain and killed, and God saw all of this. He was looking down on earth, and he saw his precious people, the apple of his eye, being killed and persecuted, and he saw that happening, and he thought, okay, I'm going to protect you. And he fought for them mightily. He worked drastically during the French Revolution, and unfortunately the Roman Catholic Church got repaid for what they did, what they taught, so diligently taught, Sister White says, the French nation. Now they got repaid. Now they were in prison. And it's not for us to delight in that, saying, haha, they got repaid. And it's not for us to delight in when our enemies get repaid for doing something bad to us. But what's so encouraging about this is that it shows us how precious we are to Jesus, how much he loves and cares for us. And just next time, remember, the next time anyone hurts you or spites you or treats you bad or makes you feel unimportant, just remember, don't fight back, because the reformers and God's people, the Huguenots and the Walls and Seas, they didn't fight back. What they did fight with was faith and the word of God, and that kept them strong. And when we do use the weapons of faith and prayer and the word of God, that will keep us strong and fortified and protected against the attacks of the enemy. The devil can't get to us when we're fortified like that. So it's really encouraging that God will really fight for us when we submit ourselves into his hands and allow him to take over and not fight for ourselves. He will repay. And it may not be as quick as we want, like with the Walden Seas. They didn't really see their enemies during the French Revolution getting persecuted and killed and thrown into prison. But God did work for them, and he does fight for us. And this is really encouraging. It says again, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. And that was with the Pope in 1798. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. And it says here is the patience. In other words, sometimes we can be impatient, like, God, why aren't you fighting for me right now? I want it to happen now. I want to see mine enemies, the people who don't like me or treat me bad. I want to see them being visited with retribution now. I want speedy vengeance. But God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And he says that he wants to do it in everything is in his own good time. So it says, here is the patience of the saints. We're supposed to be patient and wait for God to fulfill it in his own good time. And he really will. So just a recap of the 2 points. The first point I brought up was concerning the blasphemy and how we shouldn't be allowing to put anyone or anything before God. We shouldn't, allow anything to be supreme in our lives before God. We should always put God first and not repeat the sin and the abomination really of people who do bow down to idols and worship the Pope and claim that he is God. And also the second point in verse 10 is that vengeance is God's and he will repay, and we should just really wait for him and trust in him and believe that he will protect us. We are so precious to God. We are the apple of his eye. I mean, our wars are daily before him. We're like, on the palms of his hands, and he watches us and he cares for us. So really, Revelation 13 and studying prophecy is not so boring as some people may make out to be, and it's not so mystic as some people may make out to be. It's real, it's a reality. We're going through the end of time. These things are really happening in our lives. And not just that, but it's not just prophecy, it's not just facts and figures, it's the revelation of Jesus. And in every line of prophecy, as I preached in my sermon on YouTube, in every line of prophecy, we should always be seeing Jesus. And this is how I saw Jesus in Revelation 13. It's so simple, but, it's really encouraging. And when we think of encouragement from the Bible, we usually go to Psalms for encouragement, or, any other book of the Bible where it talks about how God loves us and protects us. But we really never think of Revelation or Daniel, the prophetic book, as being a source of encouragement to someone, but it really is. Revelation 13 verse 10 is very encouraging because it tells us that when we wait for God and are patient and are living uprightly, then whoever tries to attack us, they're attacking God, and God will deal with them for us, and he protects and loves us. So this is just a quick, a short synopsis of what I've been looking at, and feel free to share this video, and I really want to encourage you to study the Bible for yourself. There's nothing like studying for yourself instead of getting spoon-fed from someone else. So don't just take this video and look at it and say, okay, there's the definition for those verses. Go and research it for yourself to be sure. Look at the verses, Luke 5:21 and John 10:33, the verses that I mentioned concerning blasphemy. Look at them and see if you can understand them for yourself. Find any other verses, if there are any other verses concerning blasphemy, which give the definition, and study Revelation 13 for yourself. There are other chapters to Revelation, but this is a comparatively easy one to study, because many of the symbols are quite easy to find, the understanding, the meaning of them. And just really study it verse by verse. Don't just look at the whole thing and say, okay, so-and-so said this is what it means. Take each verse at a time and meditate upon it, and take each symbol and weigh up the evidence, weigh up, the Bible, the great controversy, spirit of prophecy quotes, the concordance, the dictionary, everything, and just research each word, each symbol, each verse at a time, and then bring the whole together, all the symbols together as a grand whole, and you will see how close we are to the end of time and how the whole Bible is so harmonious. So I just want to encourage you to do the same. And have a good day. And this is my first day of Bible training, so if you would like to join, you can join too, and you can start studying the Bible too and continuing with me as well. And this is a real blessing to me, so I hope you'll do the same. Have a good day and God bless. Bye-bye.